Hey guys, so today I want to read through the Solitude and Leadership, an author by William Deresiewicz. I'm not even sure how to say his last name. Read this a few years ago, and it stayed with me as a important um, lecture. It's a lecture about leadership, and um, so the lecture, it says, it was delivered to the plebe class of the United States Military Academy at West Point in October 2009. I read it a few times and I wanted to get back to it because it seems to me that there's a problem with leadership, and we don't develop leadership. We develop the ability to manage well, and then we develop the ability to please people and choose the people we want to please and then please those people. And I think right now what we need to do is get away from that. How do we get away from that though? Because to get away from something like that implies that we're getting towards something else. All right, so let's read, and then I'm going to try to pay attention if there are any comments or anything, but I don't expect there to be because no one watches my channel. All right, so let's go. Um, all right, so let me start reading. My title must seem like a contradiction. What can solitude have to do with leadership? Leadership means being alone, and leadership necessitates the presence of others, the people you're leading. When we think about leadership in American history, we are likely to think of Washington at the head of an army, or Lincoln at the head of a nation, or King at the head of a movement, people with multitudes behind them looking to them for a direction. And when we think of solitude, we are apt to think of Thoreau, a man alone in the woods, keeping a journal and communing with nature in silence. Leadership is what you are here to learn. Now, remember, he's talking to the plebe class at the what was it? The Army, United States West Point. Yeah. So the Army's War College. Leadership is what you're here to learn. The qualities of character and mind that will make you fit to command a platoon. And beyond that, perhaps a company, a battalion, or if you leave the military, a corporation, a foundation, a department of government. Solitude is what you have the least of here, especially as plebes. You don't even have privacy, the opportunity simply to be physically alone, never mind solitude, the ability to be alone with your thoughts. And yet I submit to you that solitude is one of the most important necessities of true leadership. This lecture will be an attempt to explain why. So far, so good. All right. We need to begin by talking about what leadership really means. I just spent 10 years teaching at another institution that, like West Point, liked to talk a lot about leadership, Yale University, a school that some of you might have gone to had you not come here, that some of your friends might be going to. And if not Yale, then Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and so forth. These institutions, like West Point, also see their role as the training of leaders, constantly encouraging their students, like West Point, to regard themselves as leaders among their peers and future leaders of society. Indeed, when we look around at the American elite, the people in charge of government, business, academia, and all our other major institutions, senators, judges, CEOs, college presidents, and so forth, we find that they come overwhelmingly either from the Ivy League and its peer institutions or from the service academies, especially West Point. Maybe you guys see that too, that a lot of these people come from these institutions of higher learning, the war colleges, the service academies like West Point, Ivy League colleges. A lot of these leaders come from those places. And what he's saying is that, wow, you don't even have solitude here. So let's see why he cares so much. So I began to wonder, as I taught at Yale, what leadership really consists of. My students, like you, were energetic, accomplished, smart, and often ferociously ambitious. But was that enough to make them leaders? Most of them, as much as I liked and even admired them, certainly didn't seem to me like leaders. Does being a leader, I wonder, just mean being accomplished, being successful? Does getting straight A's make you a leader? I didn't think so. Great heart surgeons or great novelists or great shortstops may be terrific at what they do, but that doesn't mean they're leaders. Leadership and aptitude, leadership and achievement, leadership and even excellence have to be different things. Otherwise, the concept of leadership has no meaning. And it seemed to me that that had to be especially true of the kind of excellence I saw in the students around me. Okay, this is a good time to take a break and process this for a second. So, we've all known, I've heard a lot of stories about engineers who are great engineers and they make crappy managers. They can't lead. And I do think there's a difference between technician, manager, and leader. I think they're different things. Technicians are people who do the things. So, he's talking, I'll use that technician, I'll use that to mean people who are great heart surgeons, great novelists, or great shortstops, like he says, or great mechanics, or great engineers, or whatever, great coders. Sure, you went to school for 4 years. Sure, in some cases you were supposed to have a liberal arts education, but really you're learning to like a great novelist, might have a liberal arts education, which today means something very different than it used to mean. But does that mean they're leaders just because they have that training? Man, they're not even necessarily managers. They're not even necessarily people who can organize the work um, that they do. They might have someone else organizing the work, and they just get in there and do heart surgery. So there's a big difference between someone who's really good at something and someone who's a leader. Two totally different skills, or at least he's saying maybe there's a difference, right? Like he's humbly, I submit to you, right? He's kind of has that tone, that maybe there's a difference. And so let's see what he has to say. Let's see how he defends this. And first, I'm going to take a drink. Back to the article. See, things have changed since I went to college in the 80s. Everything has gotten much more intense. You have to do much more now to get into a top school like Yale or West Point, and you have to start a lot earlier. We didn't begin thinking about college until we were juniors, and maybe we each did a couple of extracurriculars. But I know that what it's like for you guys now. It's an endless series of hoops that you have to jump through, starting from way back, maybe as early as junior high school. Classes, standardized tests, extracurriculars in school, extracurriculars outside of school, test prep courses, admissions coaches, private tutors. I sat on the Yale College Admissions Committee a couple of years ago. The first thing the admissions officer would do when presenting a case to the rest of the committee was read what they call the brag in admissions lingo, the list of the students' extracurriculars. Well, it turned out that a student who had 6 or 7 extracurriculars was already in trouble because the students who got in addition to perfect grades and top scores, usually had 10 or 12 extracurriculars, I guess. So, what I saw around me were great kids who had been trained to be world class hoop jumpers. Any goal you set them, they could achieve. Any test you gave them, they could pass with flying colors. They were, as one of them put herself, excellent sheep. I had no doubt that they would continue to jump through hoops and ace tests and go on to Harvard Business School or Michigan Law School or Johns Hopkins Medical School or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey Consulting or whatever. And this approach would indeed take them far in life. They would come back for their 25th reunion as a partner at White and Case, or attending physician at Mass General, or an assistant secretary in the Department of State. This is exactly what places like Yale mean when they talk about training leaders, educating people who make a big name for themselves in the world, people with impressive titles, people the university can brag about, people who make it to the top, people who can climb the greasy pole of whatever hierarchy they decide to attach themselves to. All right, I'm going to stop for just 1 second here and talk about Excellent Sheep. And I think he actually wrote a book called Excellent Sheep, or something like that. And it talks about how, um, well, I don't know what he's talking about. I want to make a distinction because biblically we are the sheep of his pasture. And we have to recognize a very crucial difference between what he's calling sheep here and being the sheep of God's pasture. I don't know this guy's background. I don't know if I appreciate his thinking in this area, but I don't know if he has any kind of faith tradition or um, whatever. But what he's calling excellent sheep is people who go along with whatever bureaucracy they find themselves in. They find out what the rules are, they find out how to get to the top, and they're ambitious, and they often lack the ability to understand whether that ambition is good, is moral, is ethical, or not, because they don't care, because they're following along with what their bureaucracy says. And I'm spoiling a little bit because I want you guys to be able to understand what's coming next. But he talks about that later. The I think the difference between the sheep of God's pasture and the sheep out there in the world is that many of us are followers, but who do you follow? And how much trust do you have in that thing? And is the trust warranted? And as a Christian, I believe that the Bible gives us plenty of reason, and it is very important that we find out who God is, commit, and not go through life constantly questioning it, because it's as if you want to build a house so you can live and raise a family, but you can't get past the foundation because you're constantly questioning, measuring, remeasuring, repouring your foundation. And so to be able to have a foundation we can build on, when we talk about being sheep of his pasture, we talk about submitting ourselves to him. And for those of us who have found that is a warranted move to do that, then we have to dive in, decide. We have to commit, and become his sheep. And when we do that, now we have this amazing. Many of us have this amazing BS detector for anything that is not the voice of our shepherd. And so when we see wickedness, we can call it out. Now, in the past, the service academies, the I think if you ask somebody 100 or 200 years